My name is Brian Delaney. I am a consultant with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. I know it's still a minute to go before 9 o'clock, so I'll give folks that other minute to arrive, but we will get going. I know everybody's busy, and I know you want to get on with your day. So I've been with WSPS for the last 9 years as a health and safety consultant. And among other types of training, I also do WHMIS training. And for this session, Safety Connection, as it's called, for those that have taken them before, you know what they involve usually, right? We're talking about the importance of WHMIS, and of course, standing for Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System. So we are going to touch on a number of different topics very, very briefly. This really just says, hey, don't copy our stuff without permission, of course, not unusual. There is also a short survey for you folks that wanted to just quickly scan that. You could go on to that. And the function number is 23623, and you don't need the comma in there. If you wanted to do that, that's just Ministry of Labor. They're just looking for demographic information. They're not sharing any of your information, by the way. It's kept totally anonymous. They're just trying to see who's coming into our training. The groups, types, that sort of thing. Okay. And it's 23623. Just as a little bit of housekeeping, computer audio is recommended. You can also use phone conference if it's available. Your microphones and your cameras will remain off, by the way. Just to, if you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat. I will check there once in a while. And I may, if it's a lengthy looking question, I may ask you to ask it again at the end because of time restraints. Okay. Some of the features of the Teams platform, you can put reactions on there, thumbs up, you can, have a clap, that sort of thing. I don't have any polls in this particular PowerPoint, but you can also put in messages where it says type a message. You can chat something and just hit either the arrow or hit enter. That'll pop in there and I'll see that. Do have a couple of other colleagues there to prompt me if I happen to miss one if there's a question. You can also turn on some live captions as far as, the full screen if you wanted to, and then come back out by pressing the same area. Problem is you can't see the chat questions if you go to full screen. The idea or the goals behind the Safety Connections are really to help learn and share information. It's very valuable, I think, with virtually being able to connect. You can do it from your own personal space, as they'd mentioned. I remember 15 plus years ago when I volunteered with WSPS at first before I came to work for them. It was hard to get people together with these group connections with businesses because you kind of had to commit half a day with, whereas here you can just kind of pop on for an hour on the computer. So very, very handy, right? This is our agenda for this morning, very briefly. We are, of course, looking at why WHMIS is important and the main aspects of WHMIS. I've always thought that, when I've done WHMIS training, that, folks, the routes of entry into the body of chemicals during exposures, people need to know this, right? This is really what you're trying to make them aware of. Hey, you got chemicals. This is what they can do. This is where they can get into the body. This is how they can hurt you, right? And that leads, of course, to the effects of chemical exposure. And just briefly talking about some chemical controls. And a lot of our training courses and information will start out with legal requirements that are kind of dry and a little bit boring, and but instead of starting out with kind of put it back to the end just to say, hey, this is based on a legal requirement, right? Of course, the Ministry of Labor, Immigration and Training and Skills Development do enforce the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the regulations under the Act, which of course WHMIS Regulation 860 is one of those, right? So there are some legal requirements there. So what does WHMIS do, or what's it geared to do? What's the design of it? Well, the legislation is really there to help workers to be able to identify the hazards in the workplace, either what they're working with or could be exposed to, That's really the idea. They should be able to recognize those hazards for the materials that they are working with. Again, could be exposed to or are near. Somebody might not work directly in an area where there's welding or cutting going on, but if they're in that area, could they potentially be exposed to, let's say, welding fumes as an example, right? And of course, workers should understand and know and be given training in how to protect themselves from injury and illnesses with regard to chemical exposures and those potentials, right? I think most of us understand or have heard at some point, if you've ever taken women's training, it stands for Work Placement Hazardous Materials Information System. We do have the globally harmonized system now, the GHS, for classification and labeling of chemicals, right? It is a Canada-wide system. It is delivered at the provincial level, similar to healthcare and education. Health and safety is a provincial jurisdiction unless it's a federal workplace, right? Employers, of course, have responsibilities to comply with all aspects of WHMIS. So a little bit of the background of WHMIS, and there it is again there for what the GHS or globally harmonized system for the classification and labeling of chemicals really is. Based on the United Nations developing these, having agreement to develop these standards in such a way by a number of countries. This started way back in like 1992, and over a 20-year period, everybody sort of came online. And in Canada, we brought WHMIS in from 2015 to 2018, right? So over 80 countries have adopted it. The idea previously was that it wasn't standardized between what's toxic, very toxic, or non-toxic. So this was done in a way that everybody agreed upon. Three parts of WHMIS. For most of us, I think we understand that, there's the labeling, there's the safety data sheets, and of course, there's the education and, of course, practical training aspect of WHMIS, right? So there it is there. The basic information being that, you've got a product, you have a label, there's some basic information. If you wanted further information about that product or chemical, you go to the safety data sheet, right? It's got 16 sections, the new versions of them or updated versions from material safety data sheets to our current style of 16 sections. And of course, worker education is really the generic training in WHMIS versus the practical, chemical specific training. Now, it's one thing to, briefly talk about some general information with WHMIS, but certainly very important also to let individuals know the chemicals and the exposures and the hazards that are attached to those types of chemicals that you're actually using in the workplace. So that's the difference between that general or generic and chemical specific training. Now, I mean, the three most commonly referred to states of matter are solids, liquids, and gases. I mean, this goes back to our basic science that we probably all took during grades 6, 7, and 8. We all know that there's solids, liquids, and gases, right? But what I think a lot of individuals don't always know, unless they're trained on that, is that there could be exposures based on these different products from the tasks and the exposures. Like if you're welding, you could have metal oxides, for example. If you're spray painting, you could have aerosols or mists or even vapors, right? There could be isocyanates in some of those spraying products. You can get dusts from grinding, sanding, that sort of thing, right? And of course, smoke from combustion of, engines and that sort of thing, carbon-based, right? So, or incomplete combustion of carbon. So these are all possible, even though these particles or particulate matter really is what it's known as. It's important for people to understand, what happens during a task or a process and how that can affect them, what's going to occur potentially from what they're using or the products that they're using, or from any, byproducts or uses of those chemicals, and just how the potential exposures could occur. right? So this is important to relay that information to individuals, right? And of course, gases, you think of gases generally spread out evenly in a room, right? I think of, propane, I think of different types of combustion or fuels, that sort of thing. And you can have, oxyacetylene welding processes. We have those gas cylinders, right? And of course, when you're talking about these types of products and chemicals in their different forms, this is where it's important to also consider what's the route of entry into the body, right? The most common entry route into the body is inhalation. And I teach an online occupational hygiene course on the side, do a little moonlighting. And one of the course aspects of it, one of the weekly discussions is how can chemicals get into the body? What's the most common route? Right. And generally people say inhalation, and I'll say, yeah, that's true. And why aren't the other entry routes as common? Well, you can get absorption, injection's less likely. And this is where I think you need to go through these saying, hey, the inhalation can come from using the product like this. The absorption can come from, and you folks in your industries, working in automotive industry, the tire industry, you can have solvents. You can have what we call organic chemistry for carbon and hydrogen. And a lot of these solvents can be absorbed through the skin if there's not, gloves or some other personal protective equipment used, right? And that can get into the bloodstream if it's absorbed through the skin and go travel to the liver and kidneys as an example, and potentially harm those organs, right? And from inhalation can hurt the lungs, or for heavy metals, if they're inhaled from welding processes, you get chromium-6 or manganese. These can actually have central nervous system or brain effects as well, right, from inhalation. And not to leave out ingestion, it's not the most common, but it is a potential. I've done lots of different hazard assessments over the years where I've walked through companies, and one of the things I look for is, are people eating or drinking anywhere in an area where they might be working with chemicals or there's processes that might be a contaminant? I'm looking to see if their food sources or drinking sources could be contaminated, or if what we call cross-contamination, where they're getting it on their hands, they're putting something in their mouth, right? Like whether it's a sandwich or something like that with dirty hands, a little bit of cross-contamination. These are all important aspects when it comes to providing people with information within the WHMIS training element as to these routes of entry, right? So very, very important. And, out of curiosity, I did a little bit of research in the industry of, vehicles and those types of exposures working around tires, and potentially there's volatile organic compounds for tire off-gassing, or polycycle aromatic hydrocarbons, PHs, as they're called, for, rubber as it working around rubber, for example, right? So lots of different isocyanates potentially being released. Sanding and grinding usually not as serious of an exposure, but certainly, if there's processes going on with vehicles, sanding, grinding, I know auto repair is one of the topics I talk about in the course that I train in, right? It's important as well for people to understand. WHMIS is very important so that people are made aware of the effects of those exposures to the chemicals that they work with. Why is that important? Because as workers, we have the right to know about the hazards, have the right to know about how they can hurt us. We have the right to know about how we can work safely, right? Those are our three rights as workers: the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse unsafe work, right? So dose is the concentration of that chemical. I think this is an important aspect of, well, what's the potential exposure? People should be made aware of just how much exposure potential there is for the job and the tasks that they're doing, working around any products or any contaminants or chemicals, right? That dose is really what the person is exposed to, or concentration, right? Usually the dose determining the effect on the body. The higher the dose or concentration, the more likely there is to be an acute or an effect shown right away versus a long-term chronic exposure. We think of that, that long period of time, right? That people can be exposed to a chemical. All chemicals can potentially be toxic on the body, right? It just depends on the dose or the concentration. As I'd mentioned about acute versus chronic exposures, what we usually talk about as well is the latency period. And I think the most deceptive part or challenging part of doing training in WHMIS is convincing people, say, listen, this may not affect you right away, but there's a long latency period over a period of time. If you're repeatedly exposed to small amounts of a chemical, this will get in the body. This will do some damage over a period of time. It won't be noticeable right away. However, this is doing damage and you don't want this to happen. You want to protect yourself. It's, letting people know just how important it is that they don't let these exposures occur over a period of time and make them ill, right? And these are been shown scientifically from exposures. There's toxicological data showing that, from certain exposures over a period of time, people do get sick and become ill and even die from certain exposures to certain chemicals in workplaces historically over their careers, right? So that latency period, and that's really talks about from the time of the first exposure until you notice health effects, that latency period where you don't notice anything can be quite extensive. So this is why it's so important to get the information to people to warn them of that, right? And I've had the same sort of topic discussions with people with regard to noise. So hard to convince people sometimes that their hearing is going to be impacted because they don't notice it right away, or they don't notice the hearing loss until it's already, until it actually happens, right? It can be so gradual. Similarly with chemical exposures, right? Part of the WHMIS training talks about the different hazard categories, which falls into physical group or the health group, right? And the physical was based on the physical or chemical properties of a product versus an exposure to something will also provide a health impact on that because of the ability of that product to cause illness, right? And when I think of a chemical property, one of the first things that came to my mind when I was thinking about that was carbon monoxide. And I think we're familiarized with carbon monoxide as the silent killer, CO, because we can't see it, we can't smell it, we don't feel its effect right away. But based on its chemical properties, from combustion of certain fuels, propane being one of them, as I mentioned earlier, let's say from forklifts or cutting operations, or that different types of operations, if you didn't have good ventilation in the area, what carbon monoxide does is it's a chemical asphyxiant. It preferentially binds or bonds with the hemoglobin molecules that carry oxygen in our bloodstream by about 300 times. Our bodies love this stuff. It's like carbon monoxide is like a magnet. So it replaces oxygen in your bloodstream, and this is why we've got plenty of oxygen in the air. But with over 100 parts per million or 150 parts per million within a very short period of time, people actually chemically asphyxiate because they just can't get enough oxygen to their cells. This is based on the chemical properties of that substance, right? Carbon monoxide. So just to kind of we talk about different property, and I think isocyanates for spraying operations and that sort of thing. These can also be dermal effects on the skin, right? So you can have, based on its chemical properties, this will actually cause a skin reaction, for example. So these are based on the chemistry of the product, right? So just a couple of different examples of that. And of course, constant regular exposure to a chemical can affect the health. And I'd mentioned, by getting into the bloodstream and going to those organs such as the liver. And I think a lot of us understand that if you drink too much alcohol, we've all heard of cirrhosis of the liver. and the liver will try to detoxify those chemicals and will do a pretty reasonable job. But once you overwhelm them, they will start to deteriorate and get damage to them, right? So that's some of the effects of chemicals entering and trying to be cleared from the body, but may not be totally successful depending on the exposure limit. Exposure to the lungs, based on the same idea, you just may have too much of that chemical getting into the lungs, overwhelming, creating scar tissue or something like that in the lung regions, right? Most of us, I think we've got, if you've been around working for a while, you understand we went from the old symbols to the new pictograms, right? That's a real basic part, excuse me, of WHMIS training and chemical exposure training that we go through is understanding like the flammables you see on the left, the flame over circle you see on the right. The skull and crossbones we know is an immediate serious danger, can potentially hurt or even kill someone right away. It's a toxic, right? So I'm not going through these one at a time. I've only brought up one of these. We don't use all of these, the upside down fish, in Canada because we've got water resources, environmental acts covering some of that. What we did retain is the biohazardous infectious material in Canada. That's Canada specific, right? Probably all recognize that one. The only one that I actually brought onto this slide for all the different pictograms is the flame over circle, what we used to call an oxidizer. And it just kind of, the reason you do this, if you're storing these, if you're using these products, you have to let people know that you want to keep them away from heat. They're incompatible. You don't put them near flammables or combustible materials. They can release oxygen. They can help other products burn faster. I tend to think of something like fertilizer as one of these because you have oxygen and nitrogen. It's great for the grass and the soil and that sort of thing, but not so good if you have them stored around other chemicals, for example, right? And they're not as stable. Some of those are not as stable. They could be, from dropping or shaking them. So, I mean, just a couple of areas where this is the importance of what these different pictograms contain. And for chemical specific training, if you had any of these products, this is where you might go, hey, these are some of the products that we use. This is how we store them. And if we spill these, this is how we prevent fires. And if we spill these, this is how, different aspects of spill control, spill contamination, and cleanups and that sort of thing. This is where your chemical specific training also adds to the generic training, right? Like the basic general theory or knowledge. So that's why it's so important, right? And of course, I've mentioned it over and over again already that workers need this training to make sure that they know how to handle the chemicals that they're using safely. And that includes how to handle them, how to store them, how to decant them. You think of grounding and bonding to make sure that there's no static electricity and and ignition of those vapors, right? We've all heard of flash points, I'm sure, where your concern is you've got a vapor building up and you've got a low flash point and there's enough vapor, and if there's some kind of an ignition source, people can be, burned, hurt, or even killed by those, right? And of course, decanting or pouring them out, also important to know how to do that safely, how to dispose of them. Another big concern with chemicals is how do we make sure that we don't start a fire with these, right? Storage is very important, right, with regard to fire safety. And I'd mentioned a little bit about response and spills and spill releases and exposures, and people should really have some information on what they're going to do about that. Are they going to run out of the area? Are they going to try to contain that? They, of course, should be reporting it. And in response to these areas for handling, storing, and disposing of, decanting, is what are people using with regard to personal protective equipment? What do they need? How do they use it? You should also train people on the limitations of that, how to put it on, how to take it off. How do you tell when you need to replace it? I mean, CSA standard Z94-4 with regard to PPE refers to this, and with respirators and also, fitting them, fit testing, that sort of thing, right? And for anybody wearing respirators, you've probably gone through, self checks to make sure that they're actually working properly, and they're self seal checks, right? So these are all important areas that maybe in addition to your regular generic training, might be training on how to use personal protective equipment and some chemical specific training as well, right? So these are all important areas. When we talked about labels, the importance of labels, of course, I mean, it is a legal requirement. I did mention that there's a legal requirement for having labels. They should, of course, be legible. People should be able to have access to them and read them. And there it is there. They have to be on all those different chemical products, containers, packages. And generally speaking, responsible parties include the supplier and, of course, the employer, right? And there they are listed. Suppliers usually provide those when they ship them in, and employers have responsibilities to make sure that they're legible. If they are removed or defaced, or you spill a chemical on those labels, they're replaced, or a workplace label is utilized, right? Until you can do that. Different types of labels. I'd mentioned supplier labels. I'd mentioned the workplace labels. And of course, there's laboratory labels if a business is producing those in-house, right? Workers need to be able to read those labels and understand the information before they use a chemical. And I don't know about anybody else. I'm aging myself a little bit. I predate WHMIS by a number of years, but I remember as a high school student working in the retail sector, cleaning washrooms, men and women's washrooms at age 17, not being given any training on both either bleach or toilet bowl cleaner. And if anybody knows where I'm going with this, if you've ever combined bleach and toilet bowl cleaner, you actually create a toxic gas cloud. And I was never made aware of that. And I actually did, hey, one wasn't working very well, and then I tried another one on top of that. It was only a very small, minute quantity of that, but it immediately created a really toxic gas cloud. I was almost overwhelmed, and I ran out of the washroom. And I was so embarrassed by what I'd done. I didn't even report it at the time. And if anybody wanted to use the women's washroom, I said, sorry, ladies, you can't go in there right now. There's a problem in there. And ironic that 40 years later, here I am, doing training in health and safety, including WHMIS training. But that's why it's so important, because if people don't have that information, and if they're not coached and trained to look for that information and ask questions, they can easily make a mistake. It's really that easy. That's, I guess, my point. While I was inexperienced and maybe not as smart as I am today when I was 17, it was an honest mistake, right? And people can make them, and you want to try to avoid those because the consequences can be much more severe. I was pretty lucky. Safety data sheets, a little bit of an overview. They went away from the 9-section old material safety data sheet to the 16 sections. And I believe one of the reasons was that you can access the information a little more readily. Not everybody needs or wants to read an entire 10-page safety data sheet. You might be wanting to look at a particular piece of information or a few pieces of information. And I think it's easier to get to with the new safety data sheet format, right? Or newer. But it does describe the properties, the potential hazards, how to use the product safely. It might also give you first aid. It might tell you what the legal exposures are, or recommended exposures, what type of personal protective equipment to use, some responses to spills, that sort of thing, right? And the idea being that people have the information, and legally it has to be available to workers for that review if they have any questions. And I think it's just a good idea for people to understand what they're using, what the issues are with it, and how to use it safely, and asking questions if they're not sure, right? I've gone to a number of workplaces where they've stated that it's available digitally on the computer and that, and that's great. People should know how to do that, how to get on that, have access to it. And if they don't do it very often, they might struggle with it. That's the difference between using a computer digital access platform for it versus having the binders, let's say, right? The binders are usually a little more easily accessible to the average worker that may not jump on a computer very often. That's where I see the benefit of that, right? I'd mentioned the 16 sections and the value of being able to glance and look at different sections, right? Should be available to those workers that are working around or could be exposed to those chemicals, so they can check on those. That hierarchy of controls, notice on the top they start, it's in green for elimination and substitution, versus down at the bottom where they get to personal protective equipment, it's in red. So really the idea of a control is that it protects people, either eliminates that hazard or protects them satisfactorily, right? So that's the idea of what a control should do, to as low as reasonably achievable possible risk level, right? That's supposed to reduce the risk. And I tend to think of chemicals when I think of, going through this hierarchy of controls. You may use these in combination with chemicals. You may try to eliminate the most hazardous type of chemical. You may substitute it for, I think of isocyanates, a spray painting product or a hardener, clear coat that doesn't contain isocyanates. So there's an elimination and substitution. Or if you're spraying, you still might need ventilation systems like a local exhaust ventilation system to remove the majority of those vapors or aerosols or mists, as an example, right? Or you also enclose an area for a spray paint booth for a spray painting operation, something like that, right? So those are all engineering controls versus you put up a sign going, hey, watch out for this hazard. Don't go near it, right? And administrative controls are, they are training. That can be, you could limit people's exposure by maybe rotation, something like that, right? And then, of course, personal protective equipment can be respirators, can be gloves, can be, chemical suits, Tyvek suits, that sort of thing, right? To protect the skin. It depends on what those contaminants are and in what quantity, right? And I talked about what a control is, right? It should either eliminate or minimize that hazard to an acceptable level. The idea being that you don't want to start at the bottom, just give people some personal protective equipment. Can you do any better? You certainly want to look at the top of that hierarchy of control and see, can we eliminate this? Can we substitute? What are some good engineering controls? Legislation such as Regulation 833, control of exposure to chemical or biological agents, actually does state the requirement, as well as some other designated substances regulations. 49009 does actually mention that there's a requirement to use engineering controls, elimination substitution first, before you rely on personal protective equipment, right? So just a little bit of information. And I asked this question, I know there's my little online course that I've been training in now, and it's actually been 13 years I've been doing that course. And I asked people, what are some of the problems with personal protective equipment versus those better controls for elimination or substitution? And I asked people to relay some stories, and there's never any shortage of stories as to what they've seen people doing wrong using personal protective equipment, as an example, right? And if you perhaps during the pandemic, you've seen people wearing respirators and they had the nose clip part down around their chin. I mean, it's easy to make a mistake. I probably went to put it on once or twice myself and went, oops, I got it on the wrong way, right? And it's not doing nearly the right kind of job as when you have this, respirator on the correct method. You get a proper seal so you don't get contaminants coming through the sides, as an example, right? A little bit of legal. I've already kind of jumped onto this, segued into the legal requirements when I talked about Regulation 833. There's also the Industrial Establishment Regulation 851, Part 3 for industrial hygiene. And that also talks about having clean air, proper personal protective equipment, proper training for individuals, that sort of thing, right? And of course, with WHMIS, there's responsibilities for the employer, supervisors, as well as the workers. In Ontario, we call this really the internal responsibility system, those shared responsibilities between those workplace parties, the employer, supervisor, and worker. And the supplier of those chemicals or products also have responsibilities as well, right? So those are some shared responsibilities legally under WHMIS Regulation 860. Some employer duties, and I think most of us know that the employer does have more responsibilities under the Health and Safety Act, as well as a lot of the regulations that fall under the Act, including WHMIS. They have to make sure the containers coming into the workplace are labeled. We talked about that, making sure that they're all have proper labels, either supplier labels or workplace labels, that they have safety data sheets that are up to date. And especially when new information becomes available, they should be obtaining those. And a lot of the suppliers will do this by providing those new safety data sheets if anything has changed, right? And quite often they'll say, hey, here's new and improved chemical XYZ or something like that, right? And provide those safety data sheets. Of course, ensuring those safety data sheets are not only obtained, but made available to workers. We did talk about that. So that is an employer duty, right? Employers also have to make sure they take all precautions reasonable in the circumstances to protect the health and safety of workers, what we call the general duty clause in Ontario 25(2)(h) in the Act. They have to develop safety data sheets if they're producing products in-house, right? And the other aspect is providing education and training. I'd mentioned the theory aspect of it, the generic WHMIS training. You're providing some overall training on what WHMIS is, what chemicals are, what they can do potentially, versus that chemical specific training. And having worked in the food industry for a number of years before I came to WSPS, we use some of the suppliers to do that chemical specific WHMIS training. They would come in, they're supplying the chemicals. They would actually bring in a representative to say, here's your chemicals. And this was for the sanitation department, as an example. They would bring in the supplier of the chemical company. They would bring in an individual to provide training on those chemicals specific to what the company was purchasing and using, and what those products were, how they were to be used safely, how they were to not be used, or what you needed to avoid, and what personal protective equipment, how to handle it, how to store it, that sort of thing, right? Specific to those different chemicals. The part in the bottom in blue, I kind of highlighted, or I guess I underlined the part that I thought was the most important, where it kind of said employers are really responsible to ensure workers receive that chemical specific training. And this is really what I'm getting at, right? Regardless of whether those chemicals are new or not. So not only should you provide it initially, but provide it occasionally. You don't have to do it every year, WHMIS training, but should be done every 2 or 3 years, maybe, whatever you think is the most appropriate. Personally, I think that people forget things very quickly. I know I do. So I assume that I'm not the only one, right? Supervisors also have duty under Section 27 in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, right? Make sure workers are actually wearing that personal protective equipment. They understand how to wear it properly and not take it off. It's very tempting to want to take off personal protective equipment. It's hot. It's not always comfortable. We've had a lot of warm weather in July, and I certainly understand that it can get in the way, but it is important, and this is a supervisor job to make people aware of the hazards and make sure they provide that training on the safe use of products, and chemicals are included in that, right? And that can be decanting, that can be disposing of it, storing of it, that sort of thing, right? As a couple of examples. And of course, making sure workers are aware of those hazards in the use of those chemicals. Supervisors can certainly follow up on that training that they've received, right? To make sure that it's been implemented properly and safely. And of course, they also have this general duty clause to take all precautions reasonable, 27(2)(c) for supervisor duties. And we're all workers, whether we're supervisors or managers, we're all workers. We all have duties under Section 28 in the Act. We have to work safely, not endanger ourselves or others. We have to use or wear that personal protective equipment. We need to get trained. We need to report hazards. If we're not sure, we need to ask questions, right? So it's our responsibility to read and understand the information from the labels and safety data sheets, right? Making sure that those labels are there, reporting if they're not, or if they're damaged. And similarly, I've always tried to encourage supervisors and workers, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask those questions. Talk to your supervisors. And for supervisors, I've always tried to encourage them to say, get a good rapport and communication with workers. Make sure they feel comfortable coming to you and asking you questions, because you don't want them to not know about hazard, and so that you can do your job properly as a supervisor or manager, right? Definitely important to make sure people don't feel like they can come to management and supervision to ask questions if they need to, right? It's so important. Supplier duties, of course, under WHMIS, they have to make sure that they provide those labels when they supply the products, make sure the safety data sheets accompany those, and ensure that they're in English and French in Canada, right? It is a requirement. And providing a copy of those safety data sheets to the purchaser, as I'd mentioned, right? I know we're about 40 minutes in, and I'm pretty close to the end, so the timing is okay. There's no issue with that. Just as a little bit of a follow-up, the Ministry of Labor that we usually call them, of course, they've changed their name a couple of times to the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. They do have what they call inspection initiatives, and there is an inspection initiatives with regard to occupational hygiene from April 1st of this year till March 31st of 2026. And what they're looking for is kind of reviewing the compliance to WHMIS, the training and labeling requirements. They're looking, the Ministry of Labor, that is, to make sure that businesses have not only provided that generic WHMIS training, but have also provided that chemical specific training. And I know access to not only making sure that you have labels, but also access to safety data sheets is another big important thing that they do look for, right? And there's the point below saying, are those available? Where are those? Does everybody know about them? Do they have access to it? And of course, they also look for compliance with Regulation 833, control of exposure to biological or chemical agents. That's a table that's utilized in Ontario. It's got chemical exposure limits for about 750 different products approximately in Ontario. And why are they doing this? Well, there's the bottom line. Maybe I could have started with that one. Approximately 300 workers die every year from illnesses related to chemical exposures. And that's almost one a day each year. And these are from maybe historical or, I guess, career exposures for individuals, right? Pardon me, I jumped ahead there. But this is why they're doing this and going to the trouble. If they see exposures, and we have Ministry of Labor referrals that come to us as a safety association. I've certainly done a few hazard assessments in this area for chemicals as well as other types of hazards when we go in and look around to make recommendations to companies. And we look to see how can we help them improve, right? So this is where I think it's important for businesses to look at what they're doing for the training. And WHMIS is just one part of workplace safety, of course, right, for chemical safety, but certainly can extend to other areas for safety in the workplace. So this is where chemical safety being so important and pertinent, where so many people can die potentially, maybe not all right away, but a lot of individuals are affected by this. And if those that don't die, there's many others that become ill from this, right? From exposures, be sensitized to those. That's why it's so important to make sure individuals aren't exposed or overexposed to those chemicals. There's a little do-it-yourself chemical specific training on August 13th there. Tailors it to WHMIS training for specific workplace needs. I think this is a little bit longer than what I'm doing today. Provide some best practices for grouping chemicals by department or exposure group, and some strategies for aligning those with regulatory updates and inspection priorities. So some areas there, and you can see this and get some more information. And if I have this, did I copy and paste this? Let me see if I can get this for you. I can probably put this in here in the chat. So bear with me. I will try to do this. There it is. If I've done this correctly, there it is there. It might have been put in there a little bit earlier, so thanks for those folks that have done this already. So that's sort of the idea. And just a little, to close things off, WSPS has lots of resources that can help you feel free to go to our website at wsps.ca. We answer questions for free, some complimentary consulting. We have lots of training, of course, that you're probably aware of. There's also the WSIB Health and Safety Excellence Program. And just a few resources here that, where we've taken our information from. And I want to thank everybody for coming. Does anybody have any questions about the information that was provided? A little bit of general information, right?
Hey, Brian, just a quick question. Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Smith with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. Brian, and just wondering if you can get into a little bit about what bonding and grounding is when decanting chemicals from one container to another.
Yeah, well, grounding eliminates that electrical potential, and bonding equalizes the electrical potential so that there's no ignition source. You don't create an ignition source through static electricity. So that's what that's referring to. That's why both are important for grounding and bonding. So the grounding is, you might have a container, you hook up the cables to a drum and the container you're pouring into to be able to bond that when you're decanting. And you've also got those drums grounded through a system where you've got in your chemical safety rooms and those containers, you've got the grounding part of it, and the bonding, you've got both. And the whole idea is you're equalizing or eliminating that electrical potential. Static electricity is one, but even you can get some that sort of thing should be left out of chemical storage rooms too, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a potential for an electrical charge, right? It's another source. So really, you're trying to either eliminate that electrical potential or equal that electrical potential through bonding. Grounding eliminates it, whereas grounding eliminates it versus bonding equalizes that electrical potential to prevent that ignition.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the idea.
And also with respect to chemical storage, can you speak a little bit about the type of areas where chemicals should be stored? For example, a parts cleaner or something that's used, chemicals used in a parts washer or brake cleaner, or any type of flammable solvent or anything like that would be used in a auto repair shop or an organization that recycles auto parts. Can they just keep it on the bench or like in a shed, or should they put it in a cabinet?
The idea is with the chemical storage cabinets that are properly with self-closing doors and that sort of thing, the idea is that you don't have larger quantities lying around. You could probably have a small quantity of something you're utilizing on a regular basis on your work area or workstation, something like that. But any larger quantities should be really stored. That's really the idea, is that you're minimizing the amount that you're utilizing or that people could be exposed to, and that these products are also closed up. I've seen and had complaints from individuals working around where they've got open baths of turpentine or varsols or things of that nature, and potentially either getting them on their skin or just kind of breathing in some of the vapors that might be coming off of these. Having a large quantity of that sort of open, probably not ideal. So, and you can see these with the requirements are, you've got your spring controlled. If you're pouring something out, or if you're putting it into a container, the idea is that you have a spring control on that. And I know they can be a pain to pour and open. But the idea is that, if you have an ignition source, it's controlled and contained into a very small quantity, so that you don't have those flammable products being ignited and potentially burning, injuring workers, right?
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Hope I answered your question, Dave.
You did, actually, and I'm sorry to be selfish and asking these questions, but take advantage of your time as well. And also, I just want to kind of point out as well the link that you shared with respect to the training on August 13th. It is a free session. We have allotted 3.5 hours for that. I'm not sure if we'll take 3.5 hours, but a few things we're going to cover off in that too, and probably we're going to ask participants to bring a safety data sheet, right? And we'll kind of step through individual safety data sheets and how to read it, and what sort of PPE is needed, how to decant or any type of hazards. For example, if it's an isocyanate, how to read it, how to store it, so on and so forth. So that's going to be part of the free training on August 13th. And we encourage everybody on the call today to sign in for that. And it's going to be virtual, and we'll step through it and see how we do. And I can't think of anything
Thanks, David.
else, Brian.
David's an
just-
account manager with WSPS, and I probably should have introduced him earlier, but
No,
I wasn't
that's
sure
okay.
about
It's
the
all good.
timing. But the
Yeah.
timing was perfect almost for 45 minutes. So
Yeah, I think we're
it's a big
good.
celebration.
Yeah.
And if anybody has any questions, feel free. And if not, thank you very much for coming. All the best to you folks. Have a great, safe summer. And hopefully you'll see you in the next training. I don't think I'm not providing it, but another consultant will be next
Yeah.
month.
Thanks,
So
Brian.
thanks, folks. And I'll hang in there for just in case there's another question.